mezuzah, tzitzis, and kiddush, it says explicitly zoiche. If a person is careful about mezuzah, he is zoche, he merits dira noah. If a person is careful about tzitzis, he merits a talis noah. If he's careful about kiddush, he merits to fill barrels of wine. The word merit clearly implies reward. You do this mitzvah, you get this reward. When it comes to the Rogel B'ner, it doesn't say Harogel B'ner Zoiche, he merits children who are Talmidei Chachamim. It says if a person is Rogel B'ner, Havyin Leibonim Talmidei Chachamim. He has children who are Talmidei Chachamim, which allows for the understanding that it isn't so much a reward, a payment from the Ribono Shel Olam, as much as it is a natural consequence. If a person is a Rogel B'ner, the natural consequence is that his children are Talmidei Chachamim. Whereas if we're talking about reward and punishment, then you use the term Zoiche. You do this mitzvah, you're Zoiche, you merit that reward. Here it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that if you're Rogel B'ner, you merit to have Bana Talmidei Chachamim. If you're Rogel B'ner, you'll have Bana Talmidei Chachamim, which almost seems like a consequence, as if I told you that if you learn Torah, you will become a Talmid Chacham. It's not a reward for having learned Torah, it's a consequence. If you learn Torah, you become a Talmid Chacham. So we have to understand, what is the connection? Again, with regards to the other three, the connection between the cause and the effect is apparent. But if you do a mitzvah that involves the house, so the reward is a nice house. So Zohir Mezuzah gets a dira noah. A mitzvah that involves a garment, so the reward is a talif noah, a beautiful garment. If you perform a mitzvah with wine, you merit an abundance of wine. Like, what is the connection between Rogel B'ner, the mitzvahs of Ner Shabbos, Ner Chanukah, and having children who are Talmidei Chachamim? Rashi tries to answer that question. Rashi quotes the pasuk in Mishlei, which says, Ki ner mitzvah v'Torah or, that mitzvah is compared to a lamp, and Torah is compared to a light. And therefore we can understand the pasuk that al yedei, through the fulfillment of ner mitzvah, of the mitzvahs involving ner, a person merits or Torah. But again, we have to understand what is the connection, even if we have a basis for it in that pasuk in Mishlei. The Balei Musar discuss an issue about the idea of hergel, the idea of habit, the role of habit in Avodas Hashem. And as a rule, they deplore the performance of mitzvahs out of habit. They cite the pasuk in Yeshaya, which says, "V'atihi yirasu ma'isi mitzvahs anashim ulumoda." That the Jews' fear of Hashem has become a mitzvah which is rooted in habit. It's thoughtless, passionless. It's just a habit. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. Because the mitzvah should be done with thought, with understanding, with fervor. It shouldn't be just habitual. Uvechein, there's another problem with the Gemara. Here it says, Harogel B'ner. If a person has the habit of performing these mitzvahs, so he merits to have Balam Talmidei Chachamim. So it's hard to imagine that you should have such a tremendous reward for doing something which has already become a habit. To the contrary, mitzvahs done out of habit are really not very highly regarded. The truth is, we've pointed out in the past that this idea of the Balei Musar is not as simple as it sounds. There is a tremendous, tremendous benefit to having good habits. And we explained as follows, that if you do not develop good habits, then you are fighting the same battles day in and day out, again and again and again. Let's say you have a person for whom it's a big nisayon getting out of bed in the morning. So if he develops a habit to get out of bed, he'll get out of bed. But if he doesn't develop a habit, then every morning he's going to go through the same agonizing internal debate. Should I get up? Should I sleep in? Should I get up? Should I sleep in? Should I get up? Should I sleep in? No, it's true that doing a mitzvah just out of habit isn't a good idea. But you can't take Avodas Hashem to the next level until the earlier levels become a habit. And I'll give you an illustration. Now imagine a person who's a chazan. He's a chazan, a first-time chazan. First-time chazan, Yomim Noroyim. So, Yomim Noroyim to daven is very, very difficult. First of all, you have to master the nusach, which is very complex. And then you have to very carefully modulate your voice. Because if you're singing a song for 3 minutes, it's one thing. But if you have to perform over a number of hours, you have to make sure you don't strain your voice. You have to make sure that you've saved the vocal strength for the high points of the service. It's technically very difficult to be a chazan for Yom Neroyim. So the first several times, perhaps, maybe the first decade, that a person is a chazan Yom Neroyim, he's thinking about the technical aspects of his performance. His voice, the projection of his voice, his mastery of the nusach, to be able to concentrate on the tefillah itself, on the meaning of the tefillah, the depth of the tefillah, and to really daven with a lot of kavanah, might be beyond him, might be beyond his ability. But after doing it for a number of years, so then the nusach becomes a habit, and the modulation of his voice becomes a habit. He can do it thoughtlessly. And now he's able to take his tefillah to the next level, where he can think about the meaning of the words and the kavanas and so on and so forth. And it's certainly that way if you think about Tekiyah Shofar. Now, Tekiyah Shofar, the first perhaps 20 years that a person blows shofar, he has to think about the technique. And is he making the sounds properly? And so on and so forth. It's only after it becomes habitual he can begin to focus on the loftier kavanas and the symbolism of the shofar and so on and so forth. And therefore, to say that developing habits in the performance of mitzvahs is not a positive thing is an oversimplification. It's true. If a person develops a habit and performs the mitzvah solely out of habit, that's to be deplored. But if a person develops a habit which in turn enables him, allows him to take the mitzvah to the higher level, then that's something positive. And I think that's the meaning of our Gemara. Haragil b'ner doesn't mean that the person simply fulfilled the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah on the technical level. That would not be deserving of such a schar of having Banu Talmidei Chachamim. When it comes to the other mitzvahs, so there it says, Hazoyer, if a person is scrupulous, if a person observes the mitzvah of tzitzis, according to the requirements of the halacha, even if he doesn't take the mitzvah to the higher level, the level of understanding and inspiration and passion, he's zoyer. He performed the mitzvah scrupulously, in accordance with the halacha. Zoicha, he is zoicha to a reward of a dirah, a nice house. If it's the mitzvah of tzitzis, he is zoicha to the mitzvah of talis noah. If it's the mitzvah of kiddush, he's zoicha to the abundance of wine. Lighting neiros in accordance with the halacha is not good enough. Here, to be zoicha to the greater reward of Banu Talmidei Chachamim, which of course is the aspiration of every Jewish mother and father, you have to perform the mitzvah on the higher level. It has to be that you perform the mitzvah with understanding, with insight. And that is only possible after the person is rogil, after the person has developed a habit. So the technical aspects of the mitzvah can be done thoughtlessly, so then he can devote himself to the depth of understanding. So then a person who attains that level of havana then has Talmidei Chachamim as children as a consequence, not as a reward. Because if a person understands what Ner Shabbos is, and a person understands what Ner Chanukah is, and integrates those values into his being, then he becomes the type of person who can give birth to Talmidei Chachamim. And therefore, that first statement of Rav Huna is unlike the other three. The other three is hazoyer. If a person is scrupulous in performing the mitzvahs of mezuzah and tzitzis and kiddush in accordance with the halacha, Hashem pays him a reward. And the reward is something which is fitting. For tzitzis, you get a nice talus. For mezuzah, a nice house. For kiddush, an abundance of wine. It says here, it's not the mitzvah per se. Hazoyer b'ner, there's no promise for a person who fulfills Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah scrupulously. Harogel b'ner, if a person has developed a habit to the extent that now he can focus on the deeper understanding, he becomes the type of person who naturally gives birth to Talmidei Chachamim. So let's understand this a little bit. Like, what could this deeper understanding be? What does Ner Shabbos stand for? What does Ner Chanukah stand for? And how is it that a person who integrates those ideals becomes a fitting parent of a Talmid Chacham? When we say Havdalah, Motzei Shabbos, we're talking Hamadlu ben Kodesh l'chol, that the Rebbeinu Shalom divides between holy and mundane, between Or l'choshech, between light and dark, between Yisrael lo'amen, between Yisrael and the nations. Let's talk about ben Kodesh l'chol. HaKadosh Baruch Hu divides between that which is holy and that which is mundane. The 6 days of the week are Chol. Shabbos is Kodesh. The difference between Chol and Kodesh is that Chol is at best a means to an end. Kodesh is an end. Kodesh is an objective. Whatever we do in the 6 days of Chol, in our professional lives, maintaining a household, etc., much of that is only the means to an ultimate spiritual end. And when is that spiritual end realized? Often only on Shabbos. During the entire week we're so busy, so involved in the rat race, that we don't have the time or the menuchas nefesh, we don't have the clarity to be able to live our lives in accordance with spiritual pursuits. Even the mitzvahs we do on the weekdays are not as they should be. Because we don't daven on a Monday the way we daven on a Shabbos. We don't learn Torah on a Monday the way we learn Torah on a Shabbos. It's almost as if in the Yemei HaChoil we're just managing to keep our noses above water, but really the day which is the tachlis, the day which is the objective, is really Shabbos Kodesh. Now, sadly, for many people, Shabbos is a very bleak day. During the 6 days of Chol, people can work and create and produce and shop and travel. And Shabbos, they feel imprisoned, constrained, restrained. It's bleak. But we know better. It's the exact opposite. That during the week we are in a prison of sorts. We are bound to that millstone. And we're grinding away to produce our daily bread. But the tachlis is Shabbos. Point out that the symbolism of the number 7, the Maral explains in several places that imagine a cube, which is a solid that exists in three-dimensional space. A cube has 6 faces: top, bottom, right, left, front, and back. So 6 is symbolic of the material physical world. The 7th is the spiritual core that brings everything together. Everything has meaning only to the extent that it is mishamish, that it serves that spiritual core. That's the 7th day, that's Shabbos. The Ner Shabbos, which welcomes the Shabbos, is the spiritual light of Kodesh as opposed to the spiritual darkness of Chol. And if a person understands that, if a person is rogil b'ner, the person understands that life cannot be simply the pursuit of materialism, which is performed in the 6 days. That to the contrary, whatever we do in the 6 days is at best a means to an end, but the tachlis, the objective, is what Shabbos stands for, which is the life of Kedusha. And the Rogel Bener, the person who doesn't have to think about how to set up the Neiros, but can think about what the Neiros symbolize, understands that that's what Ner Shabbos stands for. It's the spiritual light which is Mavdil, which separates Ben Kodesh L'Chol. The Zohar HaKadosh says that a Talmud Chacham is compared to Shabbos. And that's because the genuine Talmud Chacham, who puts aside the mundane matters of this world to be able to delve into Torah 24/7, for him, every day is Shabbos. Every day is Shabbos. And not everyone is on the level where they can engage in that type of Mesiras Nefesh. But the Rogel Bener, who understands that the tachlis of life is the pursuit of spirituality and not the pursuit of materialism, that Rogel Bener, who understands on the theoretical level what the goals of life should be, he can give birth to a Talmud Chacham. He can be the inspiration to a child who will take it a step further and become the Talmud Chacham, devoting every day of his life to the pursuit of spirituality. But, so to speak, this idea of separating between Kodesh and Chol, the holy and the mundane, is only half of the picture. To become the genuine Talmud Chacham, there's also another aspect. It's not enough to dismiss the pursuit of materialism. Even in spiritual pursuits, intellectual pursuits, it must be that the Bakoil Mikol Koil, the entirety of the Talmud Chacham's knowledge, emerges from the Torah and not from foreign sources. You know, there's a remez, which Sfarim HaKadoshim say, that about the menorah, which of course is a very important symbol of Chanukah, the Torah tells us that it was very ornately decorated with geviyim, with cups and kaftorim and buttons, and with prachim, with flowers. And the pasuk says, "Kaftorel u'prachaha mimena yiyu," that the various decorations have to come from the gold of the menorah. They're beaten out of the gold of the menorah. They're not glued on. They're not welded on. They emerge from the solid material of the menorah. And this teaches us that the adornments are not add-ons. They have to come from the menorah itself, and likewise, the dais of a Talmud Chacham, the opinions, the thoughts, the values of the Talmud Chacham have to emerge from the Torah. And the Chanuka Basarman said that if you wish to say that the das of the Talmud Chacham is the das Torah, if you wish to say that this Talmud Chacham thinks like the Torah, it has to be that 100% of his day has come from the Torah. If it's 80% from the Torah and 20% from the New York Times, he's only an 80% Talmud Chacham. If it's 50-50, I don't know if we can call him Talmud Chacham at all. But the idea is that everything hafach ba v'hafach ba the kula, it all comes from there. And it's very interesting that some say that the Rambam, for example, was mushpa from the Chacham of Yavon. But it's very important to understand something. You know, the pasuk in Kehelas says, in the end of Megillas Kehelas, that Kehelas taught people v'izein v'chiker v'tikein mishalom harbe. And I saw that in the Perish Das Mikra in Kehelas, it says a very beautiful pshat in this pasuk. It says there were many mishalim, there were popular sayings that people used to say at the time. And very often these sayings were given a lot of worth. Just like nowadays, if there's a aphorism from Benjamin Franklin, A penny saved is a penny earned. People will quote that as if it's profound wisdom. So there were many such sayings. Shlomo HaMelech and Gehalos didn't just buy into those sayings. First there was Izain. Ibn Ezra says that's Miloshin Moznayim. It's a scale. He weighed them on the scale of Torah. Then V'chiker, he investigated. And then V'tikein. Tikein means to repair. He repaired them. He said that perhaps this can't be accepted. Perhaps it's inconsistent with Torah. Perhaps you have to change a word, change an idea. Perhaps you have to turn the whole thing over. And therefore, Kehalos also took these sayings, but he didn't just take them. It wasn't that they were ideas that he possessed which came from foreign sources. He took these foreign sources, subjected them to the light of Torah, and was misakein as needed, and turned them into Torah ideas. So let me give you an interesting example. Two interesting examples. Both Aristotle and the Rambam write that a person should find the golden mean when he contemplates his personality traits, midas. That all midas can be arranged along a spectrum. There is an extreme of deficiency, an extreme of excess, and a person has to find the golden mean, the midos b'mutzos, the average midas. So, for example, if a person goes to an extreme of excess, he may be a reckless daredevil because he has too much self-confidence. On the other hand, if he has a deficiency of bravery, then he can be paralyzed with fear. So what is the perfect mean? The perfect mean is a person who takes prudent risks. So that's where a person should be. He shouldn't be a daredevil. He shouldn't be a coward. He should take prudent risks. And so it is with all midas. If you talk about the extremes of squandering one's money or hoarding one's money, both of the extremes have to be avoided. A person has to find the golden mean, the midah mutzas, for how to spend money. Likewise, when it comes to generosity, and likewise when it comes to pride, and all the midas, you have to find the perfect balance. The question is, when we talk about the perfect balance, we're not talking about an arithmetic mean. So how do you decide what is exactly between the extreme of excess and the extreme of deficiency? So Aristotle answered that you look at the community standard. You see what people do in the place you live, and you presume that that is the mean. The critics of Aristotle pointed out that what if you live in a place, they don't put it this way, but we can put it this way, what if you happen to live in stone? So would you say that the midas stone is the golden mean? Hard to imagine. Because we would consider stone as an extreme of depravity, cruelty, heartlessness. You certainly can't say that the community standard is keveya, what the golden mean should be. So the Rambam took this idea, and he was izain and chiker and tikein, and the Rambam in the Shemona Prakim says an amazing thing. He says that what the Torah asks of us, that is the midah mutzas. That is the golden mean. The mitzvahs of the Torah are designed in such a way that if you follow them, if you follow the halacha scrupulously, you will be at the golden mean. That's what the Rambam says. Torah is not a minimum. It is not a maximum. Torah is the optimal place to be. It is the midah mutzas. So it's not that the Rambam was mushba, was influenced by Aristotle. He took an idea which Aristotle formulated and he turned it on its ear. Because to Aristotle, the idea of the golden mean is derived from the standard of the community. To the Rambam, the idea of the golden mean is derived from the Torah itself. The critic's objection to Aristotle doesn't hold for the Rambam's formulation. And there are consequences of this. Let me give you a second illustration. And we talk about the extremes of haughtiness on the one hand versus shiftless, self-effacement on the other hand. So what does the golden mean? What is the perfect balance? So Aristotle writes in the Nicomachean Ethics that the perfect balance of the two extremes is pride. In other words, you should not be self-effacing. You shouldn't deny your genuine virtues. You shouldn't boast about virtues that you don't possess. But to be boastful about virtues that you do possess, that's perfect. That's the golden mean. So the golden mean is pride. The Rambam writes in the Shemona Prakim that the golden mean is anava, is humility. In other words, if you live in a world where the Ribono Shel Olam is absent, then why not be proud? Whose toes are you stepping on if you're proud? But if you live in the world where the presence of the Ribono Shel Olam is a reality, then you're going to put on airs in His presence? Makes no sense. In the presence of the Ribono Shel Olam, you have to be humble. At the same time, you recognize that Baruch Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you gifts, and He gave you talents, He gave you endowments and resources. But they're all gifts from Him. So I should be boastful. I should expect deferential treatment? Certainly not. And the point I want to make is that when the Gedolei Yisrael reflected on values that were first articulated by the Ummah Ha'olam, they didn't just buy into it. They subjected it to this process of scrupulous analysis. The Izain, the Chiker, the Tikein. And often, they turned the whole thing on its ear. And the people that think, oh, the Rambam got it from Aristotle, it's a gross oversimplification at best, and at worst, it's Lashon Hara, it's Motzi Shemra. So the Rambam did not simply say on the basis of authority, well, if Aristotle said it, it's good enough for me. He said, this is what he says, let's see. Let's see if there's something there. And he analyzed it in the light of Torah, and very often, actually, totally turned the idea over into a new formulation. But that's the idea, that the Gedolei Yisrael, the genuine Talmid Chacham, his values, his beliefs, his philosophy, is entirely rooted in the Torah. And that is the barrier between Yisrael lo Amin. As Chazal tell us, Im Yomer Lecha Adam, Torah b'umas al Talmid. That the Umas don't have access to. And that is the second important requirement for the Talmid Chacham. It's not enough that he is mavdol ben kodesh l'choil. It's not enough that he lives a life of kedusha as opposed to investing in the pursuit of materialism, of choil. It says even in the pursuit of ideas, intellectual pursuits, spiritual pursuits, he has to be mavdol ben Yisrael lo Amen, between the sources that are accessible only to Yisrael and the sources that are accessible to the Ummah Ha'olam. The Rogel B'ner, the person who's Rogel not only in the Ner Shabbos but in the Ner Chanukah, understands that. Because what does Ner Chanukah symbolize if not the idea that the Torah Yisrael, the Chachma of Yisrael, is or by comparison to the Cheshech of the Chachma of Yavon. And the Rogel B'ner who understands that can have children who are Talmidei Chachamim, because he has learned from Ner Shabbos the difference between Kodesh and Choil. He's learned from Ner Chanukah the difference between Yisrael lo Amen. If he transmits those values to his children, that is the upbringing that can produce a Talmid Chacham. And that is the meaning of the Gemara. That a Rogel B'ner, if a person is accustomed to Ner, to the extent he doesn't have to concentrate on the mechanics of the mitzvah, he can reflect on the symbolism and the values of the mitzvah, he integrates values into his being which can produce a Talmid Chacham. That's one thought for Chanukah. I'd like to share another thought that's been percolating in my head over the last few days. You know, we know, Chazal tell us, I believe the Psukim tell us, that when Klal Yisrael went to war, they would consult the Urim v'Tumim to ask if they would be successful. If you ever learn Sefer Shoftim, you see that whenever they went to war, they consulted the Urim v'Tumim. The Gemara Brachos tells us this. It says, why? Why is it important to know whether you'll be successful or not? If the cause is a noble cause, go to war. If you'll be successful, you'll be successful. If you fail in the pursuit of a noble cause. Why do you have to know in advance whether you'll be successful? And the answer is very simple. Because we don't believe in the value of suicide for a noble cause. It could be the most important cause in the world. But if there is no reasonable expectation of success, then simply to engage in a kamikaze mission is no tachlis. There's no purpose in that. And therefore, before we go to war, we design our plans, we're misyaitz, we discuss with the yayatzim, with the heads of the military, and the last step we say to the Rebbeinu Shalom, listen, this is our plan, this is our objective, will we be successful? If the Urim v'Tumim says yes, then we go to war. If the Urim v'Tumim will say no, there's no point. And we could have the best made plans, but if the Urim v'Tumim tells us we're not going to be successful, we're going to lose men in battle and not achieve our objective, there's no point in going to war. We know, of course, that after the first few years of the Bayis Sheni, there no longer was any Nevuah. The Urim v'Tumim did not exist, the Gemara Yuma says, in the time of the Bayis Sheni. So we had no access to this divine information. So we could ask ourselves the question, you know, the Chashmonaim engaged in war against the Yevanim. It was a war where there was no reasonable expectation of success. After the fact, we see it as a miracle. Musarta giborim biyad chaloshim. You handed over the strong into the hands of the weak. Rabim biyad matim, the many into the hands of the few. So after the fact, okay, all's well that ends well. But lechatchila says, how did the Chashmonaim go to war? And what did they think? They thought they'd be successful? Why did they think they'd be successful? They had no Urim v'Tumim, they had no Nevuah. The Derech HaTeva was a lost cause. It says, what gave them the confidence that they would win this battle, which would justify going to war in the first place? And what's interesting is, who were the people that led this battle? It was a band of Cohanim. And Cohanim were the least militarized segment of the Jewish people. Now the Rambam writes, that the Cohanim don't go to war, they're not drafted into the army. Their job is to be Oived Hashem, to serve in the Beis HaMikdash, to teach Torah. So here we have not just a group that is facing overwhelming odds. We're talking about a group that probably would not know how to handle a sword or how to handle a bow, a spear. And it's just this group, the Cohanim, that come forward to execute this battle. Because what gave them the confidence in their ability to do this? Okay, put that question in the back burner. There's a very, very interesting medrash. The medrash says that when the Mishkan was built in the Midbar, we know from the Chumash that it was dedicated on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But the medrash says, Psikta says, that really the Mishkan was ready on the 25th of Kislev. On the 25th of Kislev. And really, that's when the Mishkan should have been erected, and that's when the Chanukah, the dedication, should have been. But Me'ezet HaMashiach, it was decided to leave the Mishkan disassembled till Nisan. And that was 3 months. Teves, Shvat, Adar. Finally in Nisan it was erected. And the Chanukah took place. But there was a debt. The Rebbeinu Shalom owed a debt to the month of Kislev. When was that debt paid back? The time of the Chashmonaim. The Chashmonaim drove the Yevanim out and they rededicated the Beis HaMikdash on Chafei Kislev. That was a payment of the debt that was owed to Kislev, because that's when the dedication should have been. You have to understand that what is so auspicious about this day, the 25th day of Kislev, of all days, that's when the Mishkan really was completed, and it should have been dedicated, but it was pushed off to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and therefore the debt was repaid, and the Chanukah, the time of the Chashmonaim, was on that very auspicious date. As we tend to think that the 25th of Kislev had no intrinsic chashivus, it just happened to be that was the day that the Chashmonaim won, Chanukah, and therefore it became Chanukah. But it seems from this medrash that no, that was a red letter date for hundreds and hundreds of years before the Chanukah story. So what is special about this date? Okay, put that question in the back burner. There's a famous question that Reb Chaim Brisker asks about the Chanukah story. As we know that the Pach Shemen, the jar of oil, had enough oil to last for 1 day. It lasted for 8 days. Exactly how the miracle took place is a good question. Some say that they emptied the Pach into the menorah the first night, and the next day, miraculously, the Pach was refilled. So the jar was refilled with oil. Some say that the oil of the menorah burned down, and the menorah was miraculously refilled. Various interpretations. Reb Chaim Brisker asked the question. The Torah says that the oil for the menorah has to be sheven zayis, has to be olive oil. Olive oil means oil squeezed from olives. So if you have miracle oil, is miracle oil olive oil? It might look like olive oil, it might smell like olive oil, it might burn like olive oil, but it's not olive oil. It didn't come from an olive tree. It came from heaven. So how does that satisfy the requirement of sheven zayizach? It's not olive oil. It didn't come from an olive. Now, if you want to argue, well, but it's really the same thing, it's just as good, think of imitation bacon bits. Looks like bacon, tastes like bacon. It's not treif. Didn't come from a chazir. So here, good, this oil has all the characteristics of olive oil, but if it didn't come from an olive, then how can it be kosher for the lighting of the menorah? This was a famous question that Reb Chaim Brisker asked. So we have 3 questions. There's number 1, what gave the Chashmonaim the confidence that they'd be victorious in this war? Why was the Mishkan completed on the 25th of Kislev? And how could the miracle oil have been kosher for the menorah? So at first glance, one would think these 3 questions have nothing to do with each other. But I think there is an idea which underlies all the questions. There's a concept of bitachon. There's a concept of trust in the Ribono Shel Olam. The Jew is meant to place his trust in Hashem. The question is, what is the basis of bitachon? Now, bitachon obviously doesn't mean that a person should go through life with a conviction that things will turn out as he would want. You know, I would like to drive a fancy car, I'd like to live in a nice house, I'd like to wear nice clothing, I'd like to eat well, and all that costs a lot of money. So I have bitachon that the Ribono Shel Olam will support me on the very high standard I aspire to. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And it's not a question of weakness on God's part. The Ribono Shel Olam has better ideas for how I'm meant to live my life. They don't necessarily conform to my desires. So, when is a person justified in placing his trust in the Ribono Shel Olam? When is a person not justified? I don't know the answer to that question. But I'll give you what I think is a situation where bitachon is justified. if a person understands that performing a certain act or living a certain way is 100% the Ratzon of Hashem, this is what Ribono Shel Olam wants, then we have to assume that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us the kelim, He's given us the wherewithal, the means to carry that out. It is not possible that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would give us a mission and not give us the tools with which to carry out the mission. That can't be. That's not Shaya. That's impossible. Imagine if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would ask you to do something and He wouldn't have given you the strength or the financial resources to be able to do it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu would demand the impossible of a person. That can't be. HaKadosh Baruch Hu certainly is going to give you the means with which you are meant to carry out your life's mission. Again, it might not be on the plateau that you wish to live. Right? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't promise. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to give you a job without giving you the kelim with which to do the job. What's an illustration of this? The Ramban says in Parashas Vayakel, on the pasuk, it says that when Moshe Rabbeinu gave the command to build a Mishkan, it says there were two groups of people that came to him. There were those people asher nisa'o libo, whose hearts were uplifted, and there were people that were nadva rucho, that their spirits of generosity were inspired. So the Ramban writes there were two categories of people. There were people that donated funds, donated materials. That was a function of nadva rucho, spirit of generosity. And that's a very commendable thing. You know, every organization needs donors who will write checks. So if you have people that are nadva rucho, that their spirits of generosity inspire them to give money, material, that's something which is very, very important. But for the Mishnah, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to have the raw materials. You needed people to do the work. And here there was a problem. Because what were the Jews doing in Mitzrayim? They were engaged in field work. They were engaged in construction. They were doing things that didn't require fine motor skills. And now they're being called upon to perform weaving and embroidery and fine metal work. Who had those talents? Who had those skills? So the Ramban says there were people that were nisa'o libo, whose hearts were uplifted. And they said, this is the wording of the Ramban, that if the Ribono Shel Olam asked us to do this, we can do it. We can do it. And undoubtedly that's because the alternative is inconceivable. HaKadosh Baruch Hu could not have asked us to build a Mishkan if we would not be able to do it, if we wouldn't have the talents and the skills to perform this fine work. And therefore there were people that had never tried such things, but they said with confidence, it must be we can do this, because if we could not do this, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wouldn't have asked it of us. My father-in-law, Zechron Livracha, used to say in Yiddish, facetiously, he said, Avada, ich kann spielen the fiddle. Of course I can play the violin. Nur ich habe nicht probiert. I just never tried. But of course I can do it. Well, that's a joke. But that's what the Ramban says was the case over here. That everyone said, of course I can do embroidery, of course I can do weaving, of course I can do metalwork. I never tried. But it must be that I can. It must be that I have the talent. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu otherwise couldn't have asked it of me. That is bitachon. That is bitachon. Now the Sfarim point out, I'll point out the context in which they pointed out, that the gematria of the word bitachon is 75. The word bitachon is gematria 75. Beis is 2, Tes is 9, Ches is 8, Vav is 6, Nun is 50. Added up, 75. Now I was thinking that what is unique about the 25th day of Kislev? Well, if you think about it for a moment, when did the Jews start work on the Mishkan? We know that Vayakel Moshe, when Moshe gathered the Jews to give them the instructions to build the Mishkan, it was on the day after Yom Kippur, the 11th of Tishrei. So how many days is it from the 11th of Tishrei until the 25th of Kislev? The truth is it's not the same every year. Because the month of Cheshvan is sometimes Chaser and sometimes Malay. But in a year such as this, where the month of Cheshvan was Malay, so how many days do you have? Well, Tishrei is always Malay. Tishrei is always 30 days. So if you take off the first 10, because they only began on the 11th, how many days of Tishrei do you have? You have 20. Then assume that year Cheshvan was Malay, you have 30. 20 and 30 is 50. Add another 25 of Kislev, what do you have? You have 75. 75 is the gematria of bitachon. Says the Mishkan was built in those 75 days. Because to build a Mishkan requires that type of trust and reliance on the Ribono Shel Olam that we can do the seemingly impossible. Because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu demands it of us, He must have given us the skills and the talents with which to do it. And therefore, if Bitochen is 75, it takes 75 days to build the Mishkan. That was why the 25th of Kislev is an auspicious day. It's the 75th day after Yud Aleph Tishrei, after the day of the beginning of the process. And that's really when the Chanukah should have been. But Me'ezetam Sheyiyeh, it was delayed until the story of the Chashmonoim. Now the Chashmonoim also displayed the same type of bitachon when you think about it. You see, when it came to the conquest of Eretz Israel, ironically, although Kibush Eretz Israel was a mitzvah, but there was no assurance that the Jews would be victorious in any specific battle. Because the Torah itself tells us, Parshas Mishpatim, that the conquest of Eretz Israel would be in stages. Lo suchal kaloisa maher, you won't be able to drive them out swiftly. Because the Jewish population wasn't large enough to occupy the whole land. They could be overrun by animals. So Kadosh Baruch Hu told them to be incremental. You'll conquer parts, as the population grows, you'll conquer more, and so on and so forth. So when the Jews contemplate a certain battle to take a certain piece of land, will they be successful or not be successful? There's no assurance. It's true that ultimately there's a mitzvah to conquer all of Eretz Israel, but maybe this piece of Eretz Israel was not meant to be captured now. Maybe this is only meant to be captured 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So therefore, in the conquest of Eretz Israel, before the Jews embarked on any campaign, they had to consult the Rum B'Tumim. They had no way of knowing whether it would be successful or not. Maybe this is one of the parts that were meant to conquer only years from now. But the Chashmonaim found themselves in a predicament where it was clear to them that to defeat the Yevanim and to drive them out of the Beis HaMikdash, out of Yerushalayim and out of Eretz Israel, was the Ratzon Hashem. Because the alternative was unimaginable. The alternative, allowing the Yevanim to maintain their foothold, would have meant the end of the Jewish religion as we know it, the end of Klal Yisrael as we know it, and therefore this was Pasha, beyond a doubt that this was the Ratzon Hashem, and the Chashmonaim therefore reasoned we don't need the Urim B'Tumim, we don't need Nevuah. If we know this is the Ratzon Hashem, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu must have given us the means of doing it. Even though we're Cohanim, and the Cohanim are the least equipped, but it's interesting to note, and this is the Sfarim point out, that Kohen is also the gematria 75. Chaf Hey Nun is 75, which is the same as bitachon, because the Kohanim had this trait of bitachon. They understood that what has to be done has to be done. And by the way, this is not the first time. Go back to Parshas Kisisa. We know that it was Shevet Levi that took up the sword against the Egel worshippers. So this is not a unprecedented act. And they understood that if this is the job before us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu must have given us the tools, and therefore with bitachon, with this trust in Ribono Shel Olam, they had confidence they would be successful in this war. The truth is this. The truth is that all of us have tremendous talents, both springs of talent, that we are not aware of. We don't even know that we have them. Because we don't know what our job is. We don't know what our mission is. If we could only know what our mission is, we would know we would have those kalim, and for lack of knowledge of our mission, we don't know exactly what kalim HaKadosh Baruch Hu has granted us. Now I'm going to tell you something just as a cautionary note. You know, whenever a rabbi gets up and tells you things about physics, you know, quantum mechanics, relativity, assume that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Because that's the case. So I also don't know what I'm talking about, but you know, from the little I've read, there's an amazing thing that Einstein devised this iconic formula of E equals mc squared, that the energy contained in the amount of matter equals the mass times the speed of light squared, which means that a very small amount of matter contains a tremendous amount of energy. I read somewhere, this as a mushal, that the amount of energy in a packet full of sugar, you know, a teaspoonful of sugar that you tear open and pour into your coffee, there's enough energy in that packet to destroy the entire New York City with the equivalent of a 400 kiloton bomb in a packet of sugar. The problem is that our devices for harnessing energy are very, very, very inefficient. So let's ask ourselves the question: if you had a pach shemen, you have a jar of olive oil, and we put it into a lamp, and we insert a wick, and we light it. And that's a very inefficient means of harnessing the energy of this oil. How much energy really is in that oil? If a packet of sugar can destroy New York City, my guess is that a pach shemen probably could destroy the entire North America with its explosive power. So there's tremendous energy in that. The problem is that an oil lamp is an extremely inefficient device for harnessing that energy. It only harnesses a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the energy which is contained in the oil. So what was the nace of Chanukah? To answer Reb Chaim Brisker's kasha, it wasn't that the olive oil disappeared and miracle oil came to replace it. It was that the olive oil itself became 8 times more efficient, which is a miracle, because again, the oil lamp is a notoriously inefficient device, but it was olive oil. It wasn't miracle oil. It was olive oil. The olive oil burnt 8 times more efficiently, which is not a pella, because again, as Einstein put it, mathematically we can demonstrate that the oil has many, 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 many more times that latent energy. So that it should burn only 8 times as long as normal is almost a small miracle when you think about it. But the point is that this oil symbolizes the entire victory of the Chashmonaim. Now, the Chashmonaim were, in a sense, the least likely to succeed in Klal Yisrael in this war against the Yevanim. It would almost seem this is like a lost cause. Number one, they're stronger than we are. Number two, there are more of them than we have. Number three, even the Jews we have are uniquely inequipped because we're Cohanim who were never trained in military techniques. And yet, the Cohanim understood that they had reservoirs of strength that until now would never emerge. But because we understand this is the Ratzon Hashem, it must be that the Baruch Hu gave us these kalim, these tools, and therefore we will be victorious. The Pach Shemen is the symbol of that victory. The Pach Shemen also seemed to be very, very meager in what it could achieve. It could last for one day. And the Baruch Hu demonstrated there's more than meets the eye in the Pach Shemen. Now this Pach Shemen has reservoirs of power that no one is aware of, and it only emerged as a consequence of the Mesiras Nefesh of the Chashmonaim. And that really is what Chanukah is all about. Chanukah is really the understanding that if the Rosh gives us a job, we can do it. And that's what bitachon is. Bitachon is the sense of confidence that comes from the awareness that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks something of us, it must be we have the kelim to do it. And we live in a time where there is so much that needs to be done on the communal level, on the national level, on the international level, within Klal Yisrael. And sometimes we throw up our hands in despair and we tell ourselves it's impossible, that we're in such a pickle, such a predicament, that how is it possible for anyone or any group to be successful? To the extent that we understand our obligations, that is the extent to which we have the strength to be able to carry them out. That's the inspiration of Chanukah, that's the inspiration of the Pach Shemen. That's the idea of Chafei Kislev, the 75th day, which is the Gematria of Bitachon, this confidence and strength. And hopefully, Be'ez Hashem, we should be inspired over these days of Chanukah to come to this realization that there's no room for despair, that which the Rosh asks of us is within our power to do. Everyone should have a very, very lichtige final 2 days of Chanukah, and there should be an inspiration for months to come.